I've been doing this long enough to know exactly what July smells like in the NFL. Every single training camp produces the same headlines: the quarterback who looked unguardable in shorts, the pass rusher who apparently found another gear over the offseason, the receiver who showed up transformed in body and mindset, ready to make this his year. I've watched that cycle repeat with the reliability of a weather pattern, and genuinely feels different. That phrase has been attached to franchises across this entire league, and it has been wrong the overwhelming majority of the time. I'm telling you all of that so you understand the weight behind what I'm about to say. What's coming out of Las Vegas right now is not seasonal optimism dressed up as analysis. The details hold up when you actually push on them. They get more interesting under scrutiny, not less. And on top of everything happening on the practice field, the NFL just dropped the Raiders' full 2026 schedule. There's a lot to unpack there too. So today we're covering all of it. Camp news, Mendoza details, the secondary transformation nobody is talking about enough, the schedule breakdown, and my honest win predictions for this season. Fernando Mendoza is where everything has to start, because this entire roster draws its meaning from what happens at that position. The early camp reporting on him goes well beyond the standard rookie quarterback narrative assembled from a handful of impressive throws before any real competitive evaluation has occurred. Start with the physical foundation, because it gets chronically undervalued, mattering enormously once November arrives and every player on the field is carrying accumulated damage. 6'5", over 230 pounds. Long arms, the structural frame of a quarterback whose body was built to absorb contact while keeping his eyes and processing operating downfield rather than reacting to pressure closing in from the blind side. That quality is more significant than it sounds. A substantial number of quarterbacks get quietly derailed not from any cognitive weakness, but because their bodies weren't constructed to take a hit and immediately redirect full mental focus to coverage developing 20 yards away. They start anticipating contact before it arrives. Their processing slows precisely when it needs to accelerate. Mendoza's physical architecture was built for this game at the most fundamental level, and that won't appear in a completion percentage until October. But it will absolutely be visible in October. The arm strength debate deserves a direct and honest response because the pre-draft concerns raised by serious evaluators were legitimate, and dismissing them retroactively serves nobody. Real scouts with real NFL backgrounds genuinely questioned whether his velocity would hold up where defensive backs are faster and timing windows are essentially zero. What early camp reporting is showing is that those concerns, while grounded in real observation, were considerably overstated in their practical implications. Mendoza is not going to freeze defensive backs with pure velocity. What he will do is drive the ball accurately into every window Kubiak's system creates, on time, with enough authority to make a receiver's job manageable rather than heroic. In the right system, a precisely timed arm attached to elite processing and elite decision-making is worth dramatically more than a pure cannon attached to ordinary football instincts. The Raiders have spent this entire offseason constructing the right system around the right quarterback. When that combination functions as designed, the arm talent conversation tends to feel like it was always slightly beside the point. Now let me tell you about a specific detail from this camp that communicates more about who Fernando Mendoza actually is than any measurable ever could. He turned down a White House invitation. I want you to sit with that rather than moving past it. He is the first overall pick in the entire NFL draft. The football world spent months debating whether he belonged in that position. And when that invitation arrived, a moment that would have generated enormous coverage and exactly the kind of public presence most players in his position would consider not just acceptable, but genuinely deserved. His response was to stay at the facility, take additional repetitions, and keep working through the playbook. Nobody tells a first overall pick to decline a White House invitation and go throw routes instead. That kind of choice comes from somewhere internal and specific. A clear-eyed understanding of precisely where he is in his development and what this particular moment demands, completely independent of what generates the most favorable external impression. It extends further than a single decision. Reports describe Mendoza arriving before official practice sessions begin to take snaps with center Tyler Linderbaum, working both under center and from the shotgun, building the communication and timing their partnership needs before those things get tested in competitive situations where mistakes carry real consequences. Two players new to each other, new to this organization, learning an offensive system simultaneously under genuine professional pressure. Mendoza is not waiting for the practice schedule to create those opportunities. He is building what will matter in the moments that actually determine outcomes before anyone else is watching. That tells me more about this player's professional maturity than anything else I've encountered from this camp. The quarterback competition requires honest treatment because the emotional responses on both sides are running well ahead of the actual analytical picture. Kirk Cousins is tracking toward a Week 1 start based on current camp structure. And before the immediate reaction takes over, I want to say clearly, the argument for managing Mendoza's introduction deliberately is not organizational timidity dressed up as strategy. It is grounded in real developmental history with documented consequences. The Darnold cautionary tale is directly relevant. Thrown into organizational chaos before any real foundation existed beneath him, the accumulation of bad plays and losing environments built compensatory habits that took years to fully identify and address. His career nearly ended before he reached his mid-20s. The lesson is not that Darnold was always going to find his way. The lesson is that developmental timelines require real protection, and organizations that abandon that protection under external pressure pay costs that don't become fully visible until the damage has already been done. That said, here is my position stated plainly. If Mendoza goes through the full competitive evaluation of training camp and demonstrates to this coaching staff that he is ready to operate in this system from Week 1, the decision has to be to start him. And when that decision gets made, it needs genuine organizational commitment behind it. A minimum of 10 games before any serious recalibration. Not 5. Not 3 difficult outings followed by a panic move back to the veteran. 10 games. Because anything shorter is not a real developmental evaluation. It is a panic window, and young quarterbacks do not develop inside panic windows. They develop inside organizational commitments deep enough to survive early adversity without immediately reaching for an emergency exit. Now let me shift to the secondary because this is the most underreported story of this entire rebuild. Jermaine L. McCoy, selected at pick 101, is practicing. The knee is responding to the early camp workload. The athleticism that made him a consensus first-round evaluation before the injury is reportedly showing up on that practice field in ways that justify everything his pre-injury tape suggested. There are scouts across this league who genuinely believe McCoy was the most likely candidate to be the first corner off the board in this entire class if he had stayed healthy. The Raiders acquired him in the 4th round. If that knee holds through a full professional workload, this organization found a potential cornerstone corner at a fraction of his actual market value, and the current report suggests that process is moving in a genuinely promising direction. Trayvon Stokes is generating a specific kind of camp buzz. Not the generic he looks comfortable variety attached to every player in every camp, but the kind with enough concrete operational detail to actually mean something. Elite closing speed, physical willingness to attack run support aggressively rather than drifting around the edges of contact, movement flexibility to operate in coverage space when assignments demand it. That precise combination at the box safety position has been a recurring structural weakness for this defense across multiple seasons. When you compare this secondary to what the Raiders were putting on the field 2 or 3 years ago, when it functioned as essentially a guaranteed completion anytime an opposing quarterback decided to target it, the transformation does not read as incremental improvement. The 3rd and 4th corners on this current roster are better football players than who was starting for this organization during those difficult years. And here is the implication of that secondary transformation that is somehow barely making it into the coverage, despite being one of the most significant competitive dynamics on this entire team. What it means for Maxx Crosby. Crosby has been one of the most genuinely disruptive edge rushers in this league for years, while operating behind a secondary that routinely provided opposing quarterbacks with a rational and available escape. When a quarterback knows he can move through a clean throwing lane or tuck and run because the coverage behind the pass rush cannot maintain its integrity, the disruption a dominant pass rusher generates gets functionally neutralized, regardless of how talented that rusher is. Crosby wins the edge, the quarterback steps up or escapes, the sack numbers stay modest relative to the actual dominance occurring. Now give that same pass rusher a secondary that genuinely forces quarterbacks to hold the football. That makes scrambling feel dangerous rather than sensible, and everything he already does becomes exponentially more disruptive. The Raiders are building that combination simultaneously for the first time in Crosby's entire professional career. That story has the potential to define the second half of this season in ways people are not currently accounting for. In the receiver room, Malik Benson is standing out with a quick release off the line and genuine precision through his routes. The kind of reliability that builds a young quarterback's trust quickly. Dante Thornton has extraordinary measurables, the wingspan, speed, and physical frame that generate comparisons to the most gifted receiver profiles in recent memory. But measurables don't run routes, and measurables don't make catches in traffic against professionals who've spent years studying your tendencies. Thornton needs to translate that physical ceiling into consistent execution, and camp is going to tell us how far along that translation actually is. The player I find most compelling in that receiver room is E.J. Williams. For a reason traditional evaluation frameworks tend to underweight. He played alongside Mendoza at Indiana. The timing between them is not being constructed from scratch in this camp. It was built through hundreds of real competitive repetitions in a college offense both players already know deeply. That almost intuitive understanding a quarterback and receiver develop through sustained work together, where the ball is going before it even leaves the quarterback's hand, that is already present in this relationship. Reports indicate Williams has shown enough in camp that if he ends up on the practice squad, multiple franchises will immediately call to claim him. That is not a player a team building something real can afford to lose. Now the schedule. The NFL just dropped the 2026 slate, and there are things about it that are genuinely frustrating, and things that, when you look at the full picture, actually set the Raiders up better than people are giving credit for. The frustrating part first, the Raiders did not receive a single primetime game this season. Not one. No Monday Night Football, no Thursday Night Football, no Christmas, no Thanksgiving. The NFL's VP of Broadcasting explained the reasoning with refreshing bluntness. They don't know when or if Mendoza starts, and they are not slotting a team into primetime unless they believe people want to watch. You play your way into primetime. You don't draft your way there. I understand the logic even if I don't love it. What I want to happen is simple. I want the Raiders to force the NFL's hand by week 10. I want this team to put together the kind of body of work that has the scheduling office scrambling to flex them into Sunday Night Football. That is the most satisfying response to being overlooked. Not complaining about the slight, but going out and making them pay for underestimating you. The rest differential is the other scheduling concern, and this one is genuinely significant. The Raiders rank third worst in the entire NFL with a net rest differential of minus 13.5. Across 17 games, the Raiders will have on average nearly one full day less rest going into each game than their opponent. That sounds minor until you understand the compounding reality of an NFL season, where the difference between 3 days of rest and 6 days of rest is the difference between a player at 90% and a player at 75%. Over a full season, that differential shows up on the field even when it doesn't show up in the box score. The one real scheduling advantage is travel. The Raiders sit right in the middle of the league in total distance, meaning they're not burning players out with cross-country red-eye flights the way some West Coast teams do. That partially offsets the disadvantage, but the disadvantage is still real. My honest win prediction, opening week at home against Miami, is a win. The Dolphins are in genuine transition with real quarterback uncertainty. Week 1 at home is exactly the soft landing this offense needs to find its footing. Against the Chargers on the road early in the year, I'll give that one to Los Angeles. The Saints game the Raiders should handle. Against Kansas City, you split. 1 win, 1 loss across those 2 matchups. Mahomes is Mahomes, you're not sweeping him. The Patriots in early October the Raiders take care of. If everything breaks right, this team could genuinely be 4-1 through the first 5 weeks. The Bills and Rams are the real tests. I think the Raiders drop both. The Jets are in tank mode with Geno Smith starting, and that's a must-win the Raiders get. San Francisco is the one I genuinely wrestle with, but I'll say the Raiders find a way. Seattle without their coordinator is a winnable spot. Denver on the road at altitude, I'll call a loss. The Browns game might be the single most significant decision point of the entire season. If the Raiders come in at 6-4 or 5-5 with Cousins starting and the offense looking functional but not explosive, this could be exactly the moment the coaching staff makes the switch to Mendoza. Walking into the bye week at 7-5 with Mendoza having just engineered a win is a genuinely exciting scenario. After the bye, the schedule lightens just enough that a push to 9 or 10 wins is realistic. And 9 or 10 wins in year 1 of a new coaching staff with a rookie quarterback is not just a successful season. That is a statement. Here's the most compelling version of how this all plays out. The Raiders go into the bye at 7-4. The switch to Mendoza gets made. A 22-year-old quarterback with the work ethic, the leadership intelligence, the physical tools, and the organizational support we've been documenting all offseason gets 4 or 5 games to show what he can do. He wins 3 of them. The Raiders finish 10-7 and sneak into the playoffs. And suddenly the entire NFL looks at Las Vegas and realizes, completely without warning, that this thing is real. That is not a fantasy. That is a legitimate possible outcome given the roster assembled and the coaching in place around it. A secondary that went from organizational liability to emerging competitive strength in a compressed timeline. A pass rush anchored by one of the most disruptive defenders in the sport who now finally has real coverage behind him. An offensive system being operated by coaches who understand how to develop a young player's actual arc, rather than just extracting short-term production at long-term cost. And at the center of all of it, a first overall pick who declined a White House invitation to stay at the facility and throw extra routes, who shows up before official practice begins to build timing with his center in sessions nobody required and nobody was watching. The open questions remain real, but those are the questions of a team with genuine competitive upside and a coherent direction, not the questions of a franchise spinning without an identity.